The sun hung low over the dry Texas plains, casting long shadows across the Fairdale Auction Yard. Dust drifted lazily through the late afternoon air as the sound of boots scuffing against earth echoed beneath the wooden awnings. The smell of horse sweat and sun-baked hay clung to everything. Men in weathered cowboy hats leaned against fences, arms crossed, watching with narrowed eyes as handlers brought out the last horse of the day. It was always saved for the finale, for drama. And this year, it didn't disappoint. From the back corner of the crowd, Colton Maevers stood silent, his hat pulled low and his eyes fixed on the arena. He didn't have much. In fact, most folks knew he was hanging on to his land by a thread. His old pickup hadn't started in weeks, and his barn roof had more holes than nails. But he hadn't missed this auction in over a decade, even if lately he came more to remember who he used to be than to actually buy anything. Colton? What the hell's he doing here? Wade Ellison muttered, nudging Bo McCready with a smirk. Probably just here to watch, Bo chuckled. Ain't no way he's got 2 dimes to rub together. Their laughter was low, but not low enough. Colton heard it. He just didn't flinch. Years of silence had taught him how to let noise pass right through. The auctioneer's voice cracked through the speaker as the barn doors creaked open. A ripple moved through the crowd as the animal stepped forward. A massive chestnut stallion, taller and broader than anything seen in Fairdale in years. Muscles rippled under its coat like water. His name was Iron Smoke, and he moved like thunder disguised in silk. Starting bid, $25,000, the auctioneer barked. Everyone froze. Even the confident buyers looked around. That was no small price for a horse no one could quite figure out how to handle. Whispers followed. Daisy Truitt leaned over to June Rayburn, eyes wide. They say that horse threw off a rodeo champ in Amarillo and nearly broke his spine. June raised an eyebrow. Then what's he doing here? No one else wanted him, said Clint Rowdy, arms crossed, leaning against the fence. Bo tried riding him last week. Ended up in the dirt with a busted pride. More laughter. Until something shifted. Colton stepped forward. He didn't say a word, just raised his hand. The crowd stilled. Savannah Ridge, standing near the auctioneer stand, blinked in disbelief. The auctioneer hesitated. Sir, did you say 10,000? Colton nodded once. Snickers broke out behind him. Ruby Lee Cartwright whispered loudly, 10? He's lost his damn mind. But the auctioneer didn't laugh. No one else bid. They were too stunned. With a shrug and a bang of the gavel, it was done. Sold to Colton Maevers. And just like that, the poorest man in the yard had walked away with the biggest horse of the day. The dust hadn't even settled before the murmurs began. Colton Maevers walked past the staring eyes, the disbelief thick in the air around him like the heat rising from the dirt. He held the lead rope of Iron Smoke in one hand, his grip steady, even though the stallion's muscles twitched with raw tension. The horse was a fire barely contained. Every step echoed with warning, but Colton didn't flinch, not once. To those watching, it was reckless. To Colton, it was something else entirely. Purpose. Behind the wooden rails, Wade Ellison shook his head, spitting into the dirt. He's gonna get himself killed, he muttered, though a hint of something else flickered behind his words. Maybe doubt, maybe respect. Bo McCready crossed his arms, watching in silence. There was history there, though neither man spoke of it. Not out loud. Years ago, Colton had been the best horseman in this county, before everything fell apart, before his wife got sick, before the bank letters piled up, before he disappeared from the circuit. Ruby Lee Cartwright turned to Savannah Ridge with narrowed eyes. You think he's trying to prove something? She asked, half mocking, half curious. Savannah didn't answer right away. She watched Colton carefully as he led the stallion toward his old trailer, patched up and half rusted. People don't risk everything unless they've already lost more than we can imagine, she finally said, her voice softer than usual. Back at his truck, Colton tied Iron Smoke loosely to the side and opened the battered door of the trailer. The horse flared his nostrils, stomping once, refusing to budge. Colton didn't tug or raise his voice. Instead, he leaned in close, whispering something only the two of them could hear. There was no magic in his words, just a calm certainty. And after a tense moment, the massive stallion stepped forward, just once, but enough to show the start of something rare. A bond forming, quiet and unspoken. From across the lot, Jessie Lynn Harper stood near the gate, watching with her arms folded. She'd known Colton since they were kids. She knew the weight that lived in his eyes. "That man's got nothing left to lose," she said quietly to Daisy Truitt, who stood beside her. "And that horse? He's the same way." As the sun dipped lower behind the hills and shadows stretched across the Fairdale yard, the laughter died down. No one was sure what they had just witnessed. But for the first time in a long while, Colton Maevers wasn't invisible anymore. The next morning broke with a pale blue sky and the slow hum of cicadas waking across the dry fields. At the edge of his rundown property, Colton Maevers stood beside Iron Smoke, watching the stallion pace nervously inside the small corral he'd patched together the night before. The boards groaned with age, and a few posts leaned more than they stood, but it would have to do. Colton had no stable hands, no trainers, no vet on speed dial, just his own hands and whatever strength he had left in him. He tossed a saddle over the fence, letting it land with a thud in the dust. Iron Smoke snorted at the sound, flaring his nostrils and pawing the earth. Colton didn't rush. He stood there, hands resting on the rail, just watching. He knew better than to try to dominate a horse like this. This animal had seen something, been broken in a way that didn't show in his coat, but lived in his eyes. And Colton recognized that look because he saw it every morning in the mirror. Word had already begun to spread through the county. Down at Daisy Truitt's diner, folks were sipping coffee and trading versions of the story. "He's either lost his mind," Clint Rowdy said between mouthfuls of eggs, "or he knows something we don't." Ruby Lee Cartwright, seated in the corner booth, twirled her spoon slowly in her coffee. "Colton used to be somebody," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "Before June Rayburn broke his heart and left town, before his wife got sick." Back at the ranch, Colton moved slowly into the corral. No rope, no saddle, just him and the horse. Iron Smoke raised his head, ears twitching, muscles tense. For a moment, the air was thick with potential violence. But Colton just exhaled, slow and steady, and sat down on an old overturned feed bucket. "Ain't gonna force you, boy," he said softly. "Ain't nobody here to impress." In the quiet, a memory came back. Years ago, before everything, before grief swallowed him whole, Colton had trained wild mustangs with just a look and a voice. He didn't break them, he listened. And now, with Iron Smoke watching him from across the pen, he wondered if he still had it in him. If he could still reach something wild and lost, not just in the horse, but in himself. Far off, a pickup slowed down near the edge of the road, watching from a distance. It was Wade Ellison, leaning on the steering wheel with narrowed eyes. He didn't believe in second chances. But he also knew better than to count out a man who had nothing left to prove, and everything to reclaim. By the third day, the sun had turned the dust on Colton's land into something close to concrete. The wind was dry, carrying the distant smell of scorched grass and old wood. Colton stood barefoot in the dirt beside the corral, sleeves rolled to his elbows, eyes locked on Iron Smoke, who still refused to let anyone near his back. The horse was calm 1 minute, lightning the next. It was a game of patience now. One Colton couldn't afford to lose, not with everything riding on it. He tried a different approach. No ropes, no reins, just a song. A low hum, barely audible, the same melody he used to sing to his wife on warm nights under the stars. The kind of tune that seemed to slow time. Iron Smoke's ears twitched, his tail flicked, and for the first time, he took a step closer instead of away. It wasn't much, but it was something. Enough to make Colton's heart beat harder than it had in years. At Daisy Truitt's diner, things weren't so quiet. Savannah Ridge leaned over the counter, whispering with Jessie Lynn Harper, both stealing glances out the window as if watching for something or someone. "He's gonna get himself hurt," Jessie Lynn said, folding her napkin tight in her hands. "That horse's got more anger than sense." Savannah tilted her head. "Maybe that's why they understand each other," she said. "You remember what happened with Colton and June Rayburn, right? Before the cancer, before the silence." Jessie Lynn nodded, eyes heavy. Everyone remembered. June leaving town so suddenly, Colton's wife passing months later, and him withdrawing from everyone like he'd forgotten how to speak. Pain like that doesn't just go away, it settles in the bones. Meanwhile, Clint Rowdy and Beau McCready sat out front of the feed store, watching a cloud of dust rise from the road. Wade Ellison's truck appeared on the horizon. He parked, stepped out, and leaned against the hood. "He's workin' that stallion like it's redemption," Wade said, voice low. "But some animals can't be fixed." Clint narrowed his eyes. "Neither can some men." Back at the ranch, Colton stood still as Iron Smoke approached him again, inch by inch. He didn't reach out. He waited. The horse stopped just short, breath hot against Colton's chest, eyes alert. There was something unspoken in the moment, a fragile truce built not on trust, but mutual understanding. Just when Colton thought it might hold, the wind shifted, a branch cracked, and the stallion reared back, kicking dust into Colton's eyes before galloping to the far end of the pen. Colton didn't chase him. He just stood there, dust in his lashes, chest rising and falling slow. He knew now, taming Iron Smoke wasn't just about the horse. It was about facing the ghosts that rode in with him. Colton couldn't sleep that night. The creaking of the old house, the distant howl of a coyote, and the aching silence between memories kept him wide awake. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at a faded photograph pinned to the wall. June Rayburn, her smile bright, her eyes full of the kind of hope that used to live in this house. She had left him years ago without a word, right after his wife's diagnosis. No goodbye. Just an empty driveway and unanswered letters. Some said she left out of guilt. Others said it was grief. Colton never asked. He just buried it all inside, the same way he did with everything else. Out in the dark, Iron Smoke paced in the moonlight, still unsettled. There was something in the horse's restlessness that matched the storm building inside Colton's chest. He poured himself a weak cup of coffee and stepped onto the porch, boots crunching against the gravel. As he approached the fence, the stallion stopped and stared. They stood like that, eye to eye, two wounded souls too stubborn to surrender. The next morning, Savannah Ridge showed up unannounced, her truck rattling to a stop near the barn. She stepped out in worn jeans and a white shirt tucked tight, her expression unreadable. "Heard you're trying to ride death on 4 legs," she said with a crooked smile. Colton wiped his hands on a rag, surprised but not unwelcome. "You come to watch me die?" he asked. "No," she said. "I came to see if the old Colton Maevers is still alive under all that dust." They talked a while, standing near the fence as Iron Smoke grazed slowly, finally calm. Savannah asked questions nobody had in years. About the ranch. About the nights after June. About the last days of his wife, when she could barely speak and only smiled when Colton sang. He hadn't spoken those memories out loud since the funeral. When he did, his voice cracked like an old gate. Savannah didn't try to fix anything. She just listened. Later that afternoon, Colton stepped into the pen again, this time with the saddle in hand. He moved slowly, each breath matching the stallion's rhythm. Iron Smoke didn't bolt. He didn't rear. When Colton placed the saddle on his back, the horse stood still, nervous but still. The silence was thick, heavy with possibility. Then, for the first time, Colton climbed into the saddle. From a distance, Jessie Lynn Harper watched from the passenger seat of Wade Ellison's truck, eyes wide. "I don't believe it," she whispered. And for the first time in years, neither did Colton. Because in that moment, against every expectation, the horse stayed still. The morning sky broke open in streaks of lavender and gold as Colton Maevers adjusted the cinch on Iron Smoke's saddle. There was no audience, no applause, just the quiet hum of the earth waking beneath them. The horse stood still, shifting his weight but not resisting. It had taken days of silence, patience, and scars, both seen and unseen, to reach this point. Colton didn't speak. He didn't need to. The trust between them had been earned, not forced. As he swung into the saddle again, Iron Smoke's ears flicked back for only a second before relaxing. The first few steps were slow, uncertain. The stallion's muscles twitched under Colton's weight, testing, calculating. But he didn't buck. He didn't bolt. Instead, he walked. One step, then another. Colton breathed deep, the smell of leather and dust rising around him like memory. He hadn't felt this alive since before the pain settled in his bones like winter. Word spread fast. By noon, Clint Rowdy was leaning against the fence post outside Daisy Truitt's diner, shaking his head in disbelief. "Maevers got that devil horse to carry him cross the yard like he's Sunday broke," he said to Wade Ellison, who didn't respond at first. He just stared at the horizon, jaw tight. "Maybe he's not the broken-down fool we all thought," Wade finally muttered. Daisy, wiping a mug behind the counter, glanced over. "He never was," she said quietly. "Y'all just stopped looking." But not everyone was impressed. Bo McCready stood at the feed store porch, arms crossed, watching the dust rise in the distance. "He's got folks talking now, sure," he muttered. "But that horse ain't seen a crowd, ain't heard a gunfire, ain't tasted pressure yet. It's easy to ride when no one's watchin'." Later that day, Ruby Lee Cartwright showed up at Colton's ranch. She didn't come to gossip. She came with a proposition. "There's a rodeo in Lubbock next month," she said, arms folded tight against her chest. "Prize money's real. Folks from all over come to see the riders work with problem horses. You win there, Colton, and maybe you buy yourself a second chance." Colton didn't answer right away. He looked over at Iron Smoke, who stood calmly now, swishing his tail as if he had always belonged there. A part of Colton wanted to stay quiet, to protect what he had rebuilt in the shadows. But something stirred inside him, a flicker of the man he used to be. The one who wasn't afraid to stand up in front of a crowd and show them who he really was. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to let the world see that man again. The arena in Lubbock was louder than Colton remembered. The grandstands creaked under the weight of hundreds of spectators, and the smell of fried food, sweat, and stirred-up dust clung to the air. It wasn't just a rodeo, it was a show, a test, a spectacle. And he hadn't set foot in a place like this in over a decade. As he led Iron Smoke from the trailer, the stallion's ears twitched, alert to every shout, every movement. The calm they'd built on the ranch trembled under the pressure. Colton adjusted the saddle and tried to keep his breathing even. Savannah Ridge stood at the fence near the holding area, arms crossed, eyes scanning his face. "You sure about this?" she asked, her voice low. Colton gave her a small nod. "Doesn't matter if I am," he replied. "This horse needs to know I believe in him, even when he doesn't." Savannah didn't say more, but her gaze lingered on him like a memory waiting to be addressed. Back in the stands, Bo McCready leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "Place your bets," he said to Clint Rowdy beside him. "He won't last 10 seconds. Clint didn't respond. His jaw was tight. "Don't act like you didn't see what he did with that horse. You can't fake that kind of bond." Behind them, Ruby Lee Cartwright and Jessie Lynn Harper exchanged looks, their eyes quietly hopeful. The announcer's voice boomed across the arena. "Up next, number 42, Colton Maevers, riding Iron Smoke." A mixture of cheers and murmurs filled the air. Some recognized the name. Others remembered the man who vanished after tragedy. For Colton, every sound felt like an echo from the past. He tightened his grip on the reins, mounted slowly, and waited at the gate. Inside the chute, Iron Smoke shifted nervously beneath him. Colton leaned forward, whispering the same calming tune he'd hummed on the ranch, his breath steady. "We've come too far to run now," he said, more to himself than the horse. When the gate opened, the noise exploded. For a second, the world blurred. The stallion froze, tense, uncertain, then moved. Not wildly, not with fear, but with power. Iron Smoke galloped into the arena like a beast reborn. The crowd roared, and for the first time in years, Colton felt it. Not just the movement of the horse, but the rhythm of something inside him that had been buried too long. Every second he stayed on, the cheers grew louder, drowning out the whispers of the past. And just as he found that rhythm, a figure from the crowd caught his eye. A woman, June Rayburn, watching. For a moment, time fractured. Colton's body was still in the saddle, knees tight against Iron Smoke's sides, hands steady on the reins. But his mind had drifted, caught in the storm of a single gaze from the crowd. June Rayburn. She was standing at the back of the arena, just past the white rail, sunlight catching her blonde hair like a flare from the past. 10 years had passed since she left, but her face hadn't changed. Not to him. He blinked, heart thundering louder than the crowd. He thought she was gone for good. Thought she'd buried him just like he'd buried her memory. Iron Smoke sensed it. The sudden shift in Colton's breath, the falter in his grip. It was enough. The stallion bucked once, hard, the world lurching sideways. Gasps erupted from the stands as the horse twisted, testing the balance they'd built. But Colton didn't fall. His instincts snapped back like old reflexes. He leaned with emotion, hands low, calming. "Easy," he whispered, forcing himself to breathe. For Iron Smoke, the storm passed as quickly as it came. He slowed, found Colton again, trusted him. In the stands, Savannah Ridge watched the whole scene unfold, eyes flicking from the horse to the woman near the rails. She hadn't known June would be here. No one had. Savannah had carried her own quiet hopes about Colton, but now, with June's sudden reappearance, everything felt uncertain. Jessie Lynn Harper noticed too. "That's her," she said softly. "That's the one who broke him." Meanwhile, Wade Ellison leaned forward, hands clenched, tension in every muscle. "He's shaken," he muttered to Clint Rowdy. But Clint shook his head. "Nah, he's not the man he was 10 years ago. He's tougher now, and that horse knows it." Back in the arena, Colton steadied Iron Smoke into a smooth canter, circling once before guiding him toward the exit gate. The ride was over. Not perfect, but unforgettable. As they came to a stop, the crowd stood. Applause swelled through the stands, louder than any words. Yet, Colton didn't hear any of it. His eyes were fixed on June, who hadn't moved. She stepped forward slowly, crossing the boundary between memory and reality. "I never stopped watching you," she said, voice low and unsteady. "Even when I was gone." Colton stared at her, the ache in his chest swelling with every breath. Part of him wanted to scream. Another part wanted to collapse. But instead he simply said, "You left when I needed you most." And June, with tears trembling in her eyes, whispered back, "I know." The arena was nearly empty now. The dust had settled, the crowd had moved on, and the lights overhead buzzed faintly in the twilight. Colton stood beside Iron Smoke, running a hand down the stallion's neck as the horse chewed quietly on a handful of hay. But Colton's eyes were elsewhere, drawn to the quiet figure leaning against the fence just a few feet away. June Rayburn hadn't left. Not yet. He didn't say anything at first. Neither did she. The silence between them wasn't angry. It was heavy, weighted with words that had never been spoken, with questions left unanswered for nearly a decade. When Colton finally looked up, his voice was rough. "You didn't write. You didn't even come to the funeral." The pain in the sentence wasn't loud. It was quiet, worn down like leather stretched too thin. June stepped forward, the hem of her dress brushing the dirt. "I was afraid," she said. "Afraid I'd already done too much damage. Afraid I couldn't fix it." Her eyes, still the same deep hazel he remembered, glistened under the dim light. "You weren't just losing her. You were losing yourself. And I didn't know how to stand in that storm with you." Colton looked away, jaw tight. Iron smoke nudged his shoulder softly, as if reminding him he wasn't alone anymore. "You were the one person I thought would stay," he said. "When everything else started falling apart, I held on to the idea of you. Even when you were gone." "I know," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "And I hated myself for it every day." From a distance, Savannah Ridge watched the two figures in the fading light. Her heart clenched, not out of jealousy, but out of understanding. She'd seen the way Colton rebuilt himself piece by piece, not for applause or redemption, but just to feel whole again. And now here he was, face to face with the part of his past that had never healed. Savannah turned to leave, not out of bitterness, but because some wounds needed space to close. Colton finally met June's gaze again. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he said honestly. "But I know I don't want to carry this weight anymore." June nodded slowly. "Then don't. Let it fall. Let all of it fall." He looked at Iron Smoke, this wild, broken thing that had learned to trust again, and he wondered if he could do the same. Because tomorrow, there'd be no more ghosts left to face. Only choices. The morning after the rodeo was quiet in a way only small towns could be. The dew clung to the tips of the grass like tiny silver prayers, and the sky wore a soft hue of promise. Colton Maevers stood at the edge of his pasture, the leather reins of Iron Smoke resting loosely in his calloused hands. The stallion stood calm now, not tamed, not broken, but understood. Beside them, the sun climbed steadily, as if pushing them both towards something new. He'd barely slept. The conversation with June Rayburn echoed in his chest all night long, like the slow toll of a church bell. She hadn't stayed. She hadn't begged. She'd simply given him what she never could before, the truth. And that had been enough. Forgiveness didn't come easy for a man like Colton, but it came anyway, quietly, like rain on dry soil. And in that silence, something inside him shifted. Not everything needed to be fixed. Some things just needed to be released. Later that morning, Savannah Ridge pulled up to the ranch, stepping out with her usual quiet strength. She didn't ask about June. Didn't need to. She looked at Iron Smoke, then at Colton. "So," she said, brushing hair from her face, "what now?" Colton looked out at the open field stretching beyond the fence line. For years, it had felt like a prison. Too wide, too quiet, too empty. But today, it looked different. "I think I ride," he said simply. "Not to prove anything. Not to run from anything either. Just ride." Savannah smiled, something soft and genuine. "You always were better on a horse than in a house," she said. Colton chuckled, really chuckled, for the first time in what felt like years. The sound startled Iron Smoke, who flicked his ears and then leaned in gently, as if to say, "I'm still here too." As Colton mounted up, the wind picked up just enough to rustle the trees and carry away the last of yesterday. He didn't look back at the house. didn't look back at the road where June had disappeared once before. Everything that needed to be faced had already been faced. With Savannah watching and iron smoke steady beneath him, Colton nudged the stallion forward, out into the pasture, into the day, into whatever came next. Because sometimes the second chance doesn't come with applause or glory. Sometimes it just comes with the courage to ride again.